sound of silence. Fool said I, you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach out to you. But my words like silent raindrops fell and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. And the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming. And the sign says the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and whispered in the sound of silence.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Desert Island, a Sukkot celebration, also known as the Simchat Torah Tea Reimagined. It's great to see so many people here this evening on Zoom, and we've got a really exciting and fun evening ahead of us. So sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy. As you know, the Simchat Torah Tea has an almost iconic status in our community. It attracts very healthy crowds year after year on a scale not so far removed from Kol Nidre and Purim. What keeps people coming back year after year, I wondered, as I was planning this evening. Maybe it's the cream teas, maybe it's the witty banter and reflections from our honorees year after year, or perhaps it's the opportunity to come together one last time at the end of a long Yom Tov and share a special communal experience. Who can forget some of the special moments from Simchat Torah teas in years gone by? Just a few years ago, Rob Ginsburg, who was Chatan Bereshit, presented Rabbi Sachs, who was Chatan Torah, with a guide to anesthetics. He said it was an alternative to a sermon as a way to put congregants to sleep. Or just last year, who can forget who was there when Terry Sopel made history by becoming, to my knowledge, the very first person ever in our shul, perhaps in any shul, to finish his Simchat Torah speech as Chatan Bereshit with a proposal of marriage. I remember sitting there, I'm sure you do too, and I thought, how can anyone ever top that? How can any Simchat Torah tea ever top a proposal of marriage? And yet, here we all are, a year on, not in shul, not on Yom Tov, dialing into a thing called Zoom that many of us, myself included, hadn't even heard of a year ago. You don't need me to tell you that this Pesach, that just like Pesach, just like Shavuot, just like the Yom Nuriel, this will be a Simchat Torah like no other. But the purpose of this evening is exactly the same as it would be at the Simchat Torah tea. It's to share a joint tribute to our 5 honorees, who collectively have given a huge amount to our community over the years, and also to celebrate the end of a Yom Tov that many of us were concerned about, but that we've all got through and enjoyed and taken inspiration from in different ways, I hope. And what better illustration of the willingness to give to our community in all sorts of ways than the wonderful Tea in a Box initiative that was commandeered by Jackie Zinkin. I know that we've got people dialing in today from all over the world, but for those of you in Golders Green, let's all thank Jackie and her volunteers for distributing tea so that we can all enjoy, while we may not be together, a cake together, and I can see everyone clapping. So we've got a jam-packed evening, as I said, ahead of us. As always, it'll be replete with music, with memories, and with our Castaways Desert Island luggage selections. But first, let me hand over to Rabbi Belofsky for what I'm assured is going to be less than 60 seconds.
You wish. Good evening, all. This really isn't my evening, and I think you'll all agree, please do not respond, that you've heard more than enough of me over the last few weeks. This is an opportunity for me just to say a couple of thank yous. Thank you for Joel for reconceiving the Simchat Torah tea in a way that none of us imagined would be necessary, but is innovative, creative, and has really captured the imagination. Thank you to Jackie and her team for this extraordinary initiative. And mazel tov to Peter, Lucy, Robert, Edden and Aaron, and so thank you enormously for your fantastic and absolutely indispensable contribution to our community in so many ways. The evening is not mine, it's yours. How did I do, Joel?
I actually forgot to start the stop clock. It sounded like less than 60 seconds to me, so well
Let's get right.
if only that was
You can mute me now, that's it. It's the congregant's dream. Mute the rabbi, mute the rabbi.
So thank you very much, Rabbi Blofsky. I'm now going to hand over to Rabbi Sam and Robertson Hadassah, who are going to take the first part of the evening with our junior honorees, Edden and Aaron.
So it's really our pleasure and our honour to introduce these two outstanding members of our community. Aaron, I'm going to introduce Aaron, and then Hadassah will introduce Edden. Aaron and I, we got to know Aaron in our Learn to Lead programme, which was one of the first initiatives we ran nearly 6 years ago when we joined the community. And from that very moment, Aaron's questions, his enthusiasm, his attention to detail and dedication and passion for the community and for Jewish questions was something that we knew had the makings of someone incredibly special. And Hadassah and I were sitting there thinking, earmarked, this is someone who's going to run the community one day. And it's really been such a pleasure and a privilege and a humbling experience to watch him grow up over the last 5 years from a sort of slightly awkward 12-year-old, a wonderful self-assured 12-year-old, into a even more self-assured and confident and passionate and questioning young adult. And Aaron's currently putting in, he'll tell you more, but currently putting in applications to university for next year. We know that he's going to go on to achieve great things, whatever he does. And specifically, we're honouring him tonight for the way that Aaron not just contributes to the life of the community in other ways, and with jumping in with laning and all sorts of things, but really stepping up over the last year and a half and or last 2 years, have been running youth programming on Shabbat afternoons, and with enthusiasm and energy and passion for it. And I know the kids have so much enjoyed all of the things that he's been putting on, and it's really for that reason, for really stepping up when there was no one to do it. And when there's no one to do it, really, you should be the person to take upon yourself responsibility, which is a model that, of course, he's learned from the incredible other people that we're honouring tonight. And so, Aaron, it's really, our pleasure to have you as part of the community, an ongoing member of the community, and it's really, our honour to introduce you this evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Such kind words.
So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Edden, who's our junior Eishet Chayil. I'm not sure if many of you know, but Edden and her family have actually just made Aliyah to Israel, which I think was a decision made during the pandemic. So this is recognizing all that she and her family have been part of in the community in the last year. I mean, when we decided for her to be Eishet Chayil, it had nothing to do with her moving. We just thought she was genuinely just a wonderful role model for our youth, in that, like Aaron and also Naomi Walden, who deserves a shout out, ran the Shabbat program afternoons, really, when there was no one there. They were our youngest, oldest cohort of the community. As many of you know, we've struggled over the recent years with having enough older youth to look after the younger youth and the kids and be leaders. And I think this is probably our youngest cohort that became leaders, that really took on the responsibility for looking after. And they did it so fantastically, so responsibly. I think the first few times Sam went to shul to check that everything was all right, and they were running it so well. And Edden also has this amazing thing about her where everything's quite, like, she doesn't get stressed about things, from my understanding. And I think it's an amazing quality, one which I really appreciate in other people, that she's chilled. And specifically, it's been beautiful to watch Aaron, Nanny and Edden's relationship develop over the years, all going to different schools, having quite different families, but being part of the Dunstan Road youth, I think, from my understanding, has been very significant. And we've enjoyed both Edden and Aaron tremendously, having on our Shabbat meals, knowing what their favorite dishes are, Edden's family is really an example, I feel like, examples of chesed, where, you might not know, but they will look after other people. They will take in you know, people who are foreign, who need a place to live as part of their home and become really part of the family. And I think it's just such a beautiful quality for all of us to recognize and appreciate. And I think Edden really treated it like her, you know, her foreign guests as her sisters. And so we are just so delighted that Edden, that we could give you this really big goodbye in appreciation of you, and to remind you to be in touch, and that we always will consider you as part of our community, and that we will be watching you all the way in Israel, and just wish you all the best. So we're going to start the evening by asking Aaron and Edden some questions about themselves. So we've just told you a little bit about why we've chosen them, but it might be useful for you to hear a bit about who they are and where they are and how old they are and what school they're in. So maybe Aaron, could you tell us how old you are, what school you're in, what subjects you're doing, and just a brief introduction.
All right, of course. Well, I'm 17, and I go to the French Lycée in South Kensington. As some of you may know, my mother is French, and I was born in France, and I moved here when I was very young, and I'm at the French Lycée. So I'm doing the French equivalent of A-levels, which would be the baccalaureate, in which I specialize in certain subjects. So my specialisms are maths and physics. And yeah, I'm applying to uni right now, the whole UCAS choices thing, and I'm applying to engineering courses. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Edden, what about you? You started off the year one place and now you're somewhere else, and I think you're in lockdown, right?
So currently I am, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly,
Yes.
really well.
We can hear you perfectly, Edden.
Oh no, she's having some
Looks like
tech
she's
issues.
bugging out.
Edden, when you get back, we'll ask Aaron some questions, and we'll come back to you when you've got your tech on at any point in the evening. Okay, Aaron, Edden, please interrupt at any point when you're back.
Yes.
Aaron, what is your earliest memory of Golders Green Synagogue?
Right. So I've been coming to Dunstan Road Synagogue ever since I moved to London. So I'm very close. So I remember my earliest memory probably would be when there was still the old building and the old inside synagogue, which is different now. But before there used to be like a red carpet, and the bimmer was really different. And I just remember being there and sort of running around and with my family. My father, my grandfather was there. And I also remember playing in the courtyard where there used to be a school, and now it's been replaced by Ramon. I remember playing in that courtyard and having kiddush in the other building. And looking back on it now, because I haven't thought about it, and when I was preparing to sort of reply to these questions, it really brought back a lot of memories that I hadn't thought about for a while. So yeah, I do remember that old building really stuck with me. You're on mute. You seem to be muted. Unfortunately.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So you remember the old building,
Yeah.
and I think we have Edden back. Edden, are you here?
I'm not sure she is. Maybe.
Oh no.
No, she is here. She is here. Can you
Muted.
unmute her?
Yeah.
Hi, Edden.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Unfrozen.
Okay.
Tell us about what school
Okay.
you're in, what stage you're in.
So I'm 16 and I've basically just moved to Israel, and I go to a school in Jaffa called Tabitha, and it basically does the British education, so I can finish that. So I'm doing A-levels, and I'm doing art, philosophy, biology and Hebrew A-level. So yeah.
Amazing. And what's your earliest memory of GGS?
Probably Learn to Lead program. That was one of the first ever programs I went to, and we basically learned lots of different life skills. We learned first aid, we learned self-defense. So yeah.
Awesome. That was really fun for us to run as well. All right, Edden. Going to a bit more thinking questions. What's the most important thing you feel you've learned from your experience in shul and our community?
So probably definitely the various life skills from like the Learn to Lead program. Also probably volunteering. I feel like you've like given us the opportunity to volunteer, so like taking part in mitzvah days and things like that.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Lovely.
Amazing. What about you, Aaron? What's the most important thing you feel like you've learned from the shul?
So, the most important thing I learned was definitely like uh when I was younger. I was very lucky to have a huge generation of youth leaders that came before me. I'm thinking about Shimon Kelly, Helena Woolwich, lots and lots of people that used to that used to be, organizing activities and doing children's services, and their example, they have that was probably the main thing, that it's when people give to you in a community and they teach you multitude of things that we could talk very long about, but it's your responsibility as well to, as you just to like step up and continue that chain, and just pass it down to the next generation.
Well,
So yeah,
it's a beautiful
that's
message. Thanks for that, Aaron.
Beautiful. So I'm wondering now, before we ask like one or two more questions, Joel, if it might be time to listen to one of our songs, Desert Island songs. Edden, would you like to tell us what song you picked and why it's the one that you would choose above all others?
So the song I picked was What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger by Kelly Clarkson. And it was basically a song on my playlist during lockdown that I listened to. And it just like reminded me like that, like after lockdown, like it was all gonna be okay, and like we would just be like, we're all gonna come out stronger. Little did I know that I was gonna be in Israel, but yeah.
And stronger than ever, hopefully.
Stronger than ever.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. What doesn't kill you makes you fighter. What's that fever lighter? Doesn't mean I'm over, 'cause you're gone. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, stronger. Just me, myself, and I. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. You heard that I was starting over with someone new.
I must say that is one of my favorite songs too. I love Kelly Clarkson.
It's because you really relate to Nietzsche and
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
where the lyrics come from. isn't it?
Exactly,
That must be.
exactly, totally.
They missed out the line about being more creative.
Pardon?
They missed out the bit about being more creative.
Amazing. So Edden, it sounds like it's lockdown's been tricky for you. Can you just quickly, because I know Joel, I know we're on time. Tell us a bit what it's like being a teenager, someone in school studying, and in lockdown in two different countries.
Well, I think that the first lockdown, I think that was really hard, actually, because like obviously my GCSEs got cancelled very last minute, which was really annoying. And I kind of struggled with like dealing on how I was gonna like, because like my grades, and I didn't really know what was gonna happen. It was very all unexpected. And then I think the lockdown in Israel has kind of, it's in a way better, because I kind of know what's going on, and they're like, I've started anew, like I've been set up and I've started new, and I know what's going to happen. So I think it's been better.
Sounds like the uncertainty is the biggest
Yeah,
thing.
the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Thank you. Aaron, what about
Song?
what's your song, and why did you choose it?
my song's an Israeli song that I was when I was small, I was learning Hebrew, and my Hebrew teacher made me and my brother, who were learning Hebrew, like listen to this song, and I sort of forgot about it for a while, and then I just happened to stumble across it again during lockdown, and I looked for the translations because I'd forgotten most of the Hebrew that I'd learned. But and it's a very beautiful song, actually, about peace and the blessings we have, and especially in this context of lockdown, we get to appreciate much more the things that I definitely took for granted, just like being outside, staying in contact with your friends, just living a normal life. And I think that's got it's a pretty good message for what everyone's going through right now. So yeah, it's called Elohim Natan Lecha B'Matana.
אלוהים נתן לך במתנה דבר גדול, דבר נפלא. אלוהים נתן לך במתנה את החיים על פני האדמה. נתן לך את הלילה והיום, אהבה, תקווה וחלום, קיץ, חורף, סתיו, אביב, נשמה טובה להביט סביב. נתן לך שדות ירוקים, פרחים ועצים מלבלבים, נהרות, נחלים וימים.
Wow, that's a very meaningful song.
It's a really beautiful one. Thanks for sharing that one, Alan.
It's really interesting you both chose songs that took you through lockdown.
I love that.
Finally, before we pass on to the senior Chatanim,
And Neshechal.
and the Shechal, of course, what advice would you each give to the year 7s joining our youth? I don't know if any of them are watching. But
for their parents to pass on.
Yeah.
It's being recorded. We'll play it back to them for generations.
Yes.
Alan, do you want to maybe start and then Edden?
Yeah. What I would say to year 7s coming in right now into the youth is just make the most of having such a much bigger generation that me and Edden and Naomi had, because like we were, as you've been told, quite a small, close-knit group of people, and it's a huge privilege to be able to, because whether you be in like I'm in a non-Jewish school, like people come from all different areas of life, and to just have a group of Jewish people in which you meet in the synagogue, and you really have a different kind of relationship that you have with other people, and to make the most of that as much as they can. So like just coming to the activities and learning as much as you can, and as I say, just appreciating that there's so much more of you now. And I was at Rosh Hashanah, I walked by during Yisco, I walked by the group that Hannah Kaufman was leading outside in the Rimon playground, and I just saw loads of them. There were about 15. I know it was the high holidays, but there were just so many more people there. And I remember when we started out, there were quite a lot of us. So I think it's great just to keep going and just stay in contact with those people and really give it a chance to learn things that you wouldn't learn otherwise.
Thank you, Aaron. Edden, any advice for you?
So obviously the community is growing a lot, so definitely what Aaron said. Also to keep an open mind, and definitely use the incredible like opportunities that the youth has given us. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you both. You give us, along with many other of your colleagues in youth, a lot of nachas, and we wish you all the best for your exam applications and New Year. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much for both of you guys. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and thank you and Mazel Tov to Edden and Aaron. We've got a year 7 here listening, so I'm sure she's going to take note of that advice. And thank you very much to both of you for everything you've done over the past few years, and also to Naomi Walden, who was honoured a couple of years ago, but who was also part of the group of 3 of you that stepped up to run the Shabbat afternoon programmes. So we're now going to move on to our senior Chatanim and Eshet Chayil. As you know, Robert Schaverien, Lucy Coleman, and Peter Zinkin. And we're going to start with our Chatan Bereshit, who is Robert Schaverien. So I'm going to say a few words about each of our honorees, and then ask them to share some ideas with us, and play some music as well. So to many people across the shul, I'm sure to everyone here tonight who knows him, Robert Schaverien will be well known as our head of security. He's occupied that role for quite a number of years. And you will very often see him on a Shabbat morning, rushing through shul with an earpiece in his ear, liaising with our team of security guards, but most of all, working really hard to keep us all safe, often at the expense of his own time in shul or his own enjoyment of communal events. He really takes our security incredibly seriously, and it's an incredibly challenging job. It's obviously one of the most important jobs in the shul to make sure that we're all safe at all times, but also a very complicated job that involves liaising with a lot of different people and a lot of different groups, and making sure that at all times we're all kept safe. So we really are extremely grateful to Robert for all he's done in that role as head of security. But critical and much appreciated as those security efforts are, they're really only the very tip of the iceberg. And actually something that Robert shares with all of our honorees is that he does certain things in the limelight, and he does a huge amount behind the scenes as well that many people may not be aware of. And I was talking to Naomi about what Robert does for our community and the many different ways in which he contributes. And Naomi described it to me in a very interesting way. She said Robert's relationship with GGS is really like a house-proud host, caring for and looking after our community as if it were his own home. And that really goes to explain a lot of the things that you'll find Robert doing on a Shabbat morning and during the week as well. The things that he does ranges from welcoming members and visitors at the door, both as head of security, but also just as a welcoming host, directing them inside, constantly working on all kinds of maintenance and upkeep, from the kitchen to the garden, the seats, the security system. With Robert around, I think it's fair to say that things just get done, always with grace and charm. And I know on many occasions he's made our lives easier by very importantly, not just pointing out that there is a problem, but also in simultaneously either presenting options to fix it or just going out and fixing it himself, often at his own expense and certainly his own time. But as Robert will tell us shortly, his involvement with Golders Green Synagogue goes back a long, long way, far beyond what I even knew when we asked him to be Chatan B'Reishit. Believe it or not, Robert's grandparents were members of the community back in 1915 when it was first founded. And they were among the earliest members who joined the community at St. Albans Church before we even had our own building. Robert's parents were married in the shul by Reverend Livingstone, and he was born in Golders Green in 1956 and had his bar mitzvah in the shul, I think, in 1969. So given his long history in the shul, it probably wouldn't be a surprise that Robert has in fact been a junior Chatan Torah before, and he has memories of that time when he was previously honoured. But we're absolutely delighted to recognise the extraordinary contribution that Robert's made over recent years in many more ways than I've been able to mention just now. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome our Chatan B'Reishit, Robert Schaverien, and I'm going to unmute him and ask him to say a few words. I can find him. There you are. Sorry, Robert. Good things come to those who wait.
There you go. Brilliant. Hi everybody. I just want to thank the board for electing me as Chatan B'Reishit. I really, really feel humbled and honoured of the appointment. I made a few notes of a few things to say this evening. It started off saying that in the beginning, Hashem made the universe in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. The result, we are here today. He chose the Israelites as his chosen people, and the Jewish population are the descendants. And I believe that God, and whatever we therefore have done in life, is always God's will. Every day, including myself, when I put my tefillin on first thing in the morning, in the Midah, we ask the Lord to look after us, and that the slanderers have no help, and the wicked will perish, and all the enemies be cut down. And we find favour with the Lord on this, and that is why I believe that life is only what you put into it. And if you put into it, you're going to get out of it, because the Lord will, Hashem will look after you. And there've been many things that happened on the earth since it was formed. And in the Bible, you go through the plagues of Egypt, Noah, the floods, recent times, bubonic plagues, wars. In the bygone, in the Bible, you've got 2 temples that were destroyed, and now we have COVID, which is affecting all of our lives throughout the whole world. Yeah, all that and the Jewish religion are all descendants, and we all pull together. And I think that the song that I've asked for this evening really is something to show to everybody that the world is still standing. And yes, you've got to be, the world is still standing, and you've got to move, and whatever you do, it's going to be God's will. As Joel said, and those lovely words, I really, really thank you. I have very close links with Golders Green. Yes, my father was born in 1915. My grandparents were already living in the Drive in Golders Green at that time. There was no shul in Golders Green. It was an area with no shul for any Jewish people. And that's why my grandparents used to go to services on High Holy Days in St. Albans Church Hall. My father always tells me that, in fact, if everybody thinks of the Golders Green Estate and Clitter House and all the way back to where Tesco is today, and that used to be Handley Page's aerodrome, where they used to make aeroplanes. My grandparents told me that Reverend Livingstone used to go knocking on all the doors with mezuzahs in Golders Green to collect money so that they could have a shul. And the shul was opened in 1922. One of the main things when the shul was opened, they were shocked that it was built with so many pillars. And in fact, my grandfather was in seat 99, which we held right up until not so many years ago. You couldn't see the bimah because of all the pillars. And when the shul was extended a few years later, they gave the new architects, who weren't the same as the first architects, even though it was only from 1922 to 1927, an instruction, no pillars. And that is why, if you look at the shul today, you'll find that the only pillars are one pillar at each end, one square pillar in the new part, and then you've got the cantilever balcony right the way up to the other end by the bimah where there's another pillar, and that's it. It was the first one to have no pillars. My father was bar mitzvahed a year later in 1928 in the shul, and as we said, yes, my late parents, and you can see here, were married, and of course that is Dunstan Road Shul in 1945. So we have been members of the shul right since the beginning. My sister, who's online at the moment listening to this, was born in 1946, and my late sister in 1949, and they both went to Cheder at Dunstan Road. And in fact, my sister's a very good cook. I wonder if it's because she had cooking lessons at Dunstan Road. In those days, pre-marriage, you used to go for cooking lessons in Dunstan Road in the ancient kitchens. I was educated at Berkeley House to start with, which was on the corner of Hodford Road and Finchley Road. And just to show you how long ago it was in the about 1960, and they still had the trolley buses running along the Finchley Road. So that's how long ago it was. And I used to go to school with Annabelle Green, Rabbi Newman's daughter, and Adele. And after, when I went to Wessex Gardens, they stayed at Berkeley House. And then when I was at JFS, they were at JFS as well. As Joel kindly said, I was Chatan Torah for the juniors many years ago, and I remember my very proud parents delivering. Rabbi Newman had asked them to go to a shop in Golders Green and buy Cadbury's chocolate in that shop, because that shop stuck the label on it, and therefore I think it was Flax's, and they delivered Cadbury's milk chocolate to the shul because that was kosher. Yes, I was bar mitzvahed in shul in 1969, and another thing was my late grandmother, my father's mother, was so elderly that she couldn't go upstairs, and Diane Swift allowed her to be the first lady to ever sit downstairs on Shabbat in the back, providing she wore a veil over her hat. And she had to wear a veil over her hat. And just a couple of things. You'll see here my prize from the Cheder at, well, this one was from my Bar Mitzvah, sorry. This one is from Cheder in 1968. I got the award for working very hard, followed by the one they gave me on my Bar Mitzvah in 1969. So that just sums up all the things. My grandma taught at the old Jews Free School before it moved to Camden Town. My great-grandfather taught her two brothers and how to read, and they had a friend from who was from a slightly less affluent family, and my great-grandfather taught him how to read and write. He was Israel Zangwill, and that's why I was in Zangwill House at JFS. I can, after my Bar Mitzvah, my late uncle, I sat in his seat, which I kept on after he passed away, and that was 537. And today I sit in 536, right opposite, looking at where I always sat all my life. As I say, my family have been in the shul, and I feel the shul is an integral part of me. And it is a real honor to have been elected this year's Chatan Bereshit. Yes, they asked me to do a level 3 at the CST, and anything I can always do for the shul, I will always do. And once again, thank you all very much. And I just hope you like the song that I've picked.
Thank you very much, Robert. Mazal Tov again, and
thank you.
Long may your involvement with the shul continue. Thank you for everything you do for us.
It's my pleasure.
Here it is, Elton John, I'm Still Standing.
Taste of love in a simple way, and if you need to know while I'm still standing, you just fade away. Don't you know I'm still standing, better than I ever did, looking like a true survivor, feeling like a little kid, and I'm still standing after all this time, picking up the pieces of my life without you on my mind. I'm still standing. Hope to win. You're starting down the road and leaving me again. The threats you made were meant to cut me down, and if my love was just a circus, you'd be a clown by now. No, I'm still standing, better than I ever did, looking like a true survivor, feeling like a little kid. I'm still standing after all this time, picking up the pieces of my life without you on my mind. I'm still standing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm still standing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was I'm Still Standing by Elton John.
Joel, just before you go, I'd just like to say a toast to all the congregation, wishing them a healthy and prosperous year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert. And I particularly enjoyed watching everyone enjoying that song, but to my surprise, none more so than Rabbi and Rebbe Simbolowski dancing along there. I could see the whole way. So on to our Eshet Hayel, who is Lucy Coleman. Lucy and Charles, together with their son Saul, moved to Golders Green from Willesden in 2006. And over their 14 years here in the community, they've, between the three of them, given so much, often in a quiet, unassuming way. As I said before, a bit like Robert, without many people often knowing the full extent of what they do for individuals within the community and for the whole community as well. Professionally, Lucy has risen to the very top of her field. She's one of the leading family division QCs in the country. And she's never compromised in her commitment to Jewish life and to keeping Shabbat, which I understand has made her a very inspiring role model to many young women in the community. But it's really for her communal contribution that we're honouring Lucy this evening. In life before lockdown, she and Charles have been stalwart hosts to many, many people across the community, but particularly to people who are new to the community. And I think if you ask any relative newcomer, you'll very often find that the Colemans are among the people who were the first to jump out and invite them for a meal and to welcome them to the community. In a similar vein, it was Lucy who several years ago instituted a meet and greet rota on the door in shul on Shabbat morning to make sure that everyone was very warmly welcome to the shul and knew where to go. And as is so often the case with rotas, you get volunteers, but it's sometimes hard to fill the rota. And Lucy was never shy of doing the job herself if there was no one else to do it. And we're extremely grateful, just as we are to Robert, for being the warm and welcoming face of our community. Behind the scenes, Lucy's always been very professional, very generous with her professional time, offering pro bono legal advice and help to many people who sadly come to need it. More recently, as many of you will know, Lucy rose admirably to the challenges of lockdown. No sooner in early March did the general direction of travel become clear that services and many of the things we knew and loved were shutting down, then Lucy was already dreaming up new and innovative ways to keep the community connected and engaged in very challenging circumstances. At times, as you probably know, she was reading a daily story to children in the catchy Listen with Lucy sessions. She stepped in on several occasions to host shul quizzes and bake-offs on Zoom. And she was always, most importantly, I know I speak for myself, she was unfailingly there with supportive and encouraging words as we kind of navigated the challenges of lockdown over the past few months. As many of you will know, this is sadly a valedictory honour, as Lucy and Charles are currently in the process of making Aliyah and not at the moment living within the community as they prepare to move to Israel in the near future. Lucy, we're so pleased that we managed to catch you before you left and to recognise everything that you've done for GGS over the past 14 years. We're going to miss you a lot, but we're delighted that you accepted to be our Eshet Hayel. So I'm just going to start by asking you to sort of tell me a bit about your memories of the past 14 years in our community.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. And first of all, to say I'm embarrassed and flattered and grateful for everything that you've said. Memories of Golders Green. I really had one from the beginning and one from right at the end that stuck out. Yom Kippur has always been a very important day for me. It's always been the highlight of my shul going year. As my siblings who are watching will tell you, we were all schlapped to shul right from the earliest moment in the day that one could be there, and we had to sit there all day. We weren't allowed to go outside. And so Yom Kippur was always a long day, but I've loved it. I've loved the music. And my very first Yom Kippur in Golders Green, I sat there all day and I listened to the fantastic singing. And then towards the end of the day, Daniel Greenberg stood up to give a drasha and he started speaking. And at one point in his speech, he said, "Let me tell you a story. There was a little boy standing on the shore looking out. And I heard everybody in the community around me go, oh, and I thought, why are they doing that? I don't understand it. And then when I'd been in shul for about maybe 5 years, and it was Yom Kippur, and it was getting to the end of the day, and Daniel Greenberg stood up to make a speech, And he said, let me tell you a story. There was a little boy standing on the shore, and I found myself going, and I realized that this had become a Golders Green tradition of which I now felt a part myself. So that was a real, you know, rite of passage for me, and I missed it. And then the second one came really right at the end, which was when we were first allowed back in the shul just a few weeks ago. And I remember very vividly coming to shul for the first few months, and I would come in and I would look around, and I knew almost nobody. And it was a sort of extreme version of the first day of school. Who were all these people? I kept hearing people's names and I just didn't know who anybody was. And then a few weeks ago, we were back in shul for the first time, and there were maybe only 50 people in shul, something like that. But I looked around the shul and I looked at everybody, and I thought, I may not actually be able to name everybody, but that's just because I'm getting old and I've started forgetting everyone's names. But I looked at almost everybody and I thought, I know who they are. I know something about them. I feel part of their lives. They're part of my lives. And I realized that I am very much now a part of the Golders Green community. So that's the span of the 14 years for me.
Thank you, Lucy. That's lovely recollections. And we certainly hope that even though you're leaving us, you will not be a stranger and come back when the air corridors are open and free to travel again. I mentioned that you came here from Willesden, where you'd been going to Saatchi, and obviously you've been part of a number of different communities through the course of your life. How would you say, and perhaps drawing on some of the themes you mentioned, how would you say our community is different or similar to other communities of which you've been a part?
Golders Green Shul is actually Golders Green Shul community. And every shul has a USP. And there is no doubt about the fact that ours is community. There is a stronger community in Golders Green than any other shul I've ever known. You only have to be able to join up to the shul list to know that the minute anybody needs anything, the entire community steps up to offer assistance. And I know that on occasions like this, it's invidious ever to mention anybody, because if you mention anybody, you're leaving somebody out. But there are two families who I am going to name and I'm going to embarrass. And they are the Zinkins and the Chains. The Zinkins, I think, don't have the word no in their vocabulary. You only have to say to either Peter or Jackie, could you? And they say yes. And they don't even know what the question is, but they say yes. And I know they get thanked for it from time to time, but I just really want to reiterate that the contribution they make is really just incomparable. And I have appreciated every single time that they've stepped up to the plate for me and for everybody else. And the others are the Chains. The Chains are everywhere. Every time something needs doing, every time anybody needs to know anything, anytime anybody needs to be somewhere, the Chains are there with practical help. They are the most extraordinary family. Joel, you and Rachel's siblings have all followed in their wake. You're an amazing family, and our community are very, very lucky to have you. So it is an amazing community. I felt that, as I know my siblings did, most especially when my mum died a couple of years ago. Our house was full the entire time with people from shul who just came. They brought food. They were there all the time. And I can't begin to tell you what that meant to us. There's one other USP I'd like to mention, which is I think we may be the only United Synagogue which has the fantastically good fortune to have two small Haredi children in our community. And I hope Avram and Chai, if they're listening, don't mind me mentioning their names. That has been an astonishing thing for me, because I have learned so much from them that I wouldn't otherwise have known. And I hope they've learned things from us as well. And I've been able to make friends with people from a completely different community. And I think that's fantastic. So I wanted to say hello and thank you to them as well.
Thank you. Lovely reflections, Lucy. And just finally, I know in a way your memories of your first and last or most recent memories kind of tell this story a little bit, but in terms of how the community's changed during your time here, what would you kind of particularly pick out as some of the developments that you've been part of?
Well, that's a very easy question for me, because the most obvious answer is that the mean age of the community has dropped by about 40 years. When we first came to the shul, it was an elderly community. I think I'm now part of the elderly community. But now on a Shabbat morning, say now, in normal times, pre-pandemic, it's sometimes difficult to get into the shul for the number of small children thronging through the doors. So that has been the most wonderful development. And it's impossible to mention that without also mentioning Sam and Hadassah, who have been a wonderful addition to our community. Sam is always there. As soon as someone walks in the door, he walks up to them. He's got a smile that goes from ear to ear and welcomes them, makes them feel at home. Hadassah is one of those few people of whom one can truly say as beautiful inside as outside, and she's very beautiful outside and very, very beautiful inside, and they've made an enormous difference to our community. So I think that's probably the main difference. I hope the meeting and greeting has made a bit of a difference. I can't tell you the number of people who have come up to me at various times over the years and said, it made a big difference to me when I walked in the shul doors. I didn't know anybody, and you were there, and you smiled, and you wished me good Shabbos, and I felt at home. And I hope that that's something which will carry on when Charles and I are ensconced in our new home in Israel.
Definitely, we shall do it in your name. Thank you very much, Lucy. And finally, your music choices. So you chose a few tracks. So we actually started the evening with The Sound of Silence by the Maccabees, which some of you may have heard at the start. And we're going to finish the evening with something that you have chosen, which we'll come to later. But before we do, you have chosen a track, En Keloheinu, by the Shabbaton Choir, which I know has particular meaning for you. So perhaps you could just tell us briefly before I play it.
Yeah, well, there's a little story behind this, which is that Charles and I have been going through the process of making Aliyah, and we have to deal with the Jewish agency. And I don't actually know who the Jewish agency is. I know the lady who fronts them, but I think the Jewish agency is a little office where people sit there thinking out ways in which they can make your life difficult by asking you to produce things that you're never, ever going to be able to produce. And we thought that we had done pretty well, and we'd ticked all the boxes, and we had everything that we needed, and we were just waiting for our visas. And then 2 weeks ago, on a Monday morning, when I was very, very, very busy at work, we got an email from them saying, can Charles please produce documentary evidence that you've lived in England for the last 23 years? And I thought, are you insane? We've moved out our house, we've thrown away all our old records. How are we going to prove it? So needless to say, one of my first ports of call was Peter Zinkin, and said, Peter, can you tell me how I get hold of council tax records? We tried all sorts of things. It took us most of the day. I was shattered by the end of it, although we had found documentary evidence. And I thought, well, at least we've got through that. And then the next morning, I woke up and I was feeling very tearful, and I had sent Saul a message overnight saying I missed my mum, and he messaged in the morning saying so did he. And I thought, well, I've just got to get on with work today. I ruined the whole of yesterday looking for documents, and no sooner had I started work than I got another email from the Jewish agency with another list of things they wanted. And I just lost my cool, and I phoned them and I shouted at the woman, and she put the phone down on me. And I rang her back and I cried. And Charles said to me, oh, that was quite a good trick, crying. And I said, it wasn't a trick. And it was just horrible. And the crying did the trick, because they then withdrew their request for all the documents. And I was totally disconcerted, and it ruined my day. And then I had to start work, and I didn't finish till about 1 o'clock in the morning, exhausted. And I thought, right, before I go to bed, I've just got to put on some consoling music just to calm me down. And for me, consoling music is chazanut, is the music of my childhood. And I looked through YouTube, and I saw there was a version of the Shabbaton, Ein Keloheinu, which I absolutely love, and I put it on with the video, and I was watching it, and at 1 minute and 52 seconds on the screen, up popped my mum, and she was on the screen for about 10 seconds, and I watched and I couldn't believe it. And I just felt that if she was standing in the room shouting, "I'm still here," that was her way of telling me. So I'd like you to listen to it. It's absolutely beautiful. Both my brothers sing in the Shabbaton choir, and it's a really, really beautiful piece of music.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and again, Mazal Tov, and thank you for everything you've done for us. That was the Shabbaton choir with Ein Keloheinu. Really beautiful singing, including your brothers, and some very youthful-looking people who we know now who have aged nonetheless over the last 10 years. So now we come to our Chatan Torah, and I know time is short, but we are going to allow an extension to give Peter the full attention that he deserves. And I should just say before I start that we've all, I think, on Zoom become accustomed to certain images over the past few months. There's Guido's files behind him that we very often see. And I know that many of us have got to know intimately Peter and Jackie's conservatory ceiling, which we've had great views of over the past few months. But it's wonderful to see such a great framed picture of the two of you this evening. And I'm delighted that we can see and hear you so well. So introducing Peter is really quite challenging just because of the number of things that he and Jackie have done for our community over such a long period. And Lucy has already started the job for me, which I very much appreciate. I apologise again in advance for anything that I will inevitably fail to mention that he's done. But just to give you a taste, Peter and Jackie joined our community back in 1982. So that's 38 years ago. I think during those 38 years, there's probably barely a time that Peter and Jackie have not been heavily involved in shul leadership or supporting the community in one capacity or another. They've done, I think, probably pretty much everything that there is to do over that time. Many of us know Peter's public side, making the announcements, updating us on site drainage, other building matters within the shul, many things he does beyond the shul, working for Barnet Council as a councillor, and many other public roles as well. But much like Lucy and Peter and Robert, as I said earlier, Peter does a huge amount behind the scenes that very often passes unnoticed. And I know since being involved in the leadership of the shul over the past few years, I've just noticed so many things that Peter gets asked to do that I wasn't aware of before. And I know that that really is probably just the tip of the iceberg. So we really are tremendously grateful to Peter for everything that he's done. And of all the kind of public achievements within the shul that he's can put to his name over the past few decades, I think a few would be the appointment of the Belovskis back in 2003, the appointment of the Fromsons in 2015, the negotiation of a long lease for Ramon in 2012 that I know Peter was heavily involved in, the redevelopment of our building, or the partial redevelopment of our building at about the same time, the opening of Little Goldies more recently in 2017. Again, that list really misses off many of the things that Peter's done, but it's the kind of the big ticket items that I know that just wouldn't have happened without Peter. As many of you will know, Peter has an intricate knowledge of buildings, regulations, politics, local politics and bureaucracy, and that's really kind of why we've managed to achieve so many of the things that we have as a community. But on many other matters, he's also just been hugely supportive of Naomi, Adam and me over the past 3 or 4 years as we've attempted to fill his incredibly large shoes in leading the shul. I asked some others, again, for input in terms of how to introduce Peter. And one comment stood out that Rabbi Belovsky remarked on Peter's extraordinary ability to listen and recall every detail of a sermon or shiur, despite being ostensibly asleep. And I've seen that as well. But he also has a remarkable ear for when people aren't well or for when things aren't quite right. He's very good at picking up on all sorts of nuances that others of us might miss and making sure, again, quietly and humbly, that people who need extra attention and support get that as soon as they need it and as quickly as they need it. And as Lucy's mentioned, both Jackie and Peter just don't say no. They just give of themselves in all sorts of different ways. And the community just simply wouldn't be where it is today without everything that Peter has done. So Peter has actually been a Chatan before, but we very much wanted to recognize his contribution more over the more recent years. And we weren't able to do that last year because, as many of you will know, Peter and Jackie spend Sukkot almost every year in Israel. But we're very pleased that one of the silver linings of this particular cloud was that Peter and Jackie are here and we were able to honor him again. So we're delighted that Peter accepted to be our Chatan Torah this year. However, as Peter reminded me, had he been able to, this honor would very much have been shared alongside or together with Jonathan Davies, who was our financial representative for many years and also gave a huge amount to our community. And Jonathan, as many of you again will know, is very unwell and living in Nightingale House in Clapham. And we all miss Jonathan very much, but I know none more so than Peter, who was has been and continues to be a very close friend and colleague of Jonathan's for many years. And I know that, Peter, to start things off, you were going to share some thoughts about Jonathan.
Yes, as you said, this honour I really regard as Jonathan's, because some years ago when I stepped down from the shul to become a trustee of the United Synagogue, kindly the board made me Chatan Bereshit, and that was a wonderful experience. Jonathan was FR, continued to be FR, and then we both, as it were, Jackie and I, and he used to go to Jerusalem for Yom Tov, and therefore there was never any opportunity for him to take the honour. And the terrible irony is that this is the year when we could have recognised all that he did, because about 6.5 years ago, when we were both standing for election to the council, because although our politics were very different, Jonathan being a liberal and me being a conservative, and therefore we actually stood against each other, which caused a degree of perplexity to a number of people, particularly when to one of the election counts, he actually invited me because there was a real shortage of people who were allowed to go. So I was invited as the guest of the Liberal candidate, even though I was supporting somebody quite different. But Jonathan did an unbelievable amount, because what we agreed was that we thought that one of us might be elected at that election. And we'd sort of agreed between us that the one who got elected would be elected, and the one who wasn't elected would effectively take over both roles at the shul. And Jonathan did that. And therefore, although at the time I was chairman of the shul for a period, Jonathan effectively did all the work. I was the public voice, and I'm the person who spoke. But as Naomi mentioned at Rosh Hashanah, that the amount that Jonathan did in the background to keep things going, to know how things worked, running the office for years and years and years, really should not be forgotten. And this honour, I've said to him, because I was lucky enough to be able to see him last week and earlier this week, that this is really his honour, and that is how I'm thinking of it.
Thank you, Peter. And as I said, I know that the thoughts of the whole community are with Jonathan, and sending through your visits to our thoughts and good wishes to Jonathan, and our recognition of everything that he's done as well. Just bringing it back to you a little bit, if you don't mind. 38 years is a very long time to be involved in one community. You've seen it go through some seismic changes, some of which have already been discussed this evening. What would you say have been the most exciting developments to be involved in?
Well, what you have to understand is that I don't do steady state. Jonathan was very good at steady state, which is why we worked together so well, because we had complementary skill sets. And it's also actually not the case, as you said, that we'd been heavily, or I'd been heavily involved in the shul. Jackie had been heavily involved in the shul almost from the beginning, in that she was the one who made us join the shul because her family had been involved in shuls for forever, and it was a normative thing for her to do. My parents were almost entirely secular. I went to non-Jewish schools, and therefore my involvement with Judaism didn't really come back until I was at London Business School, and I met people there who brought me back, as it were, into the fold. And so we got married, we moved to Golders Green, and Jackie joined the shul, and almost immediately joined the board, got involved in Kiddushim. I remember Eleanor helping with Kiddushim at a very young age, and where in those days, if you didn't cut the cake in exactly the right way, even though this was a completely mad way of cutting cake, you got told off by the ladies who organised the cutting of the cake. And I still remember her being very upset for having worked out a proper way of doing it and being told off for doing it efficiently, but what was seemingly the wrong way. The shul at the time was in a period of major decline. The demographic was just massively working against it. My children were, there were a few other children of similar age, but really only a very small number. And Jackie took the children to shul. I was doing other things. I travelled a lot in those days, and so wasn't always around. And then there was the seismic event of Eleanor's Bathal. And the shul did not handle it well. And there were a number of reasons for that and a number of tensions in the shul at that particular moment. And it became clear to me that there were a number of problems that needed dealing with. And it was at that moment that a number of people, led, I think, by your father-in-law, who is one of the great anarchists of our time, and is really a wonderful catalyst for change in a way that I have rarely seen, started the second minyan. And to be honest, the transforming event for me, because I had been to shul on many occasions over the decades, and I've never found it a particularly spiritual experience, was the first minyan that the alternative minyan was allowed, that took place in the Lebetkin Hall, which was a building where Ramon isn't at the moment, just at the side. And I still remember the Kedusha from that minyan. And it was the first time that I had been with a group of people who wanted to be there and were getting something out of the service that they were participating in. And it was a genuinely transformational experience, because suddenly I understood what religion was actually about. And as a result of that, I concluded that we really did have to move from what religion wasn't about, which was what, in my view, was then happening in the rest of the organization. And so we engaged in battle, and it was battle, and it took some time to resolve. And we dragged the United Synagogue into it. We organized referenda. We got everything back together from the adventures in the Vegetarian Society. We changed Rabbonim. We eventually, it seemed like years, as you said, hired Rabbi Volosky. I still remember the meeting. The late Joe Friedman and I were in our dining room. He had come reluctantly because he had been persuaded that he ought to come, because at that moment we didn't have a very good reputation for a whole variety of reasons. And I still remember the meeting, because the first half of the meeting I was selling Golders Green to the rabbi, and suddenly I think he realized that maybe there was an actually interesting opportunity here. And in the middle of the meeting, it's a bit like the hearing the Kedusha that day in the Lebetkin Hall. In the middle of the meeting, suddenly everything switched. And from us trying to sell Golders Green to the rabbi, he started to sell himself to us. And it was at that moment I knew that we had a rabbi.
Thank you, Peter. Amazing recollections of a time that I think we often sort of forget that came before the time we live in now. Alongside all of these big developments, obviously, there are the smaller things. No one knows the shul boilers, the shul drainage system, the building intricacies, the bits and pieces that fall apart and have to be put back together. No one knows all of that better than you. I think that's accurate to say. What's your strongest memory of that latter side of your involvement in the shul?
Oh, the answer is very clear, which is David Latchman's wedding, when there was a downpour of biblical proportions. And this was before we'd managed to get the new, well, this was pre-Ramon, and the drainage system simply was not able to cope with the volume of water coming off the roofs and going down the back. And so as Hannah and, as it were, David were advancing up the aisle, the water was advancing in the other direction up the aisle from the back doors. And Joe and I, without much raincoats or umbrellas, were frantically brushing the water away from the back door, trying to reduce the volume of flow that was coming up the aisle. That was a momentarily scary moment. But of course, as you know, it continues. And only last week, Siraj and I were sorting out the drainage because after the deluge, or one of the recent deluges, we suddenly got blocked drains and water pouring into the shul. So there is an element of the fact that nothing changes when it comes to drains. But we fixed it, and it does seem to be all right now.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for, as I said, for everything that you do, from the big things to the small things, and long may particularly the small things continue. Now, your music choices, there were a couple of initial suggestions, I think, including Happy Birthday. Rule Britannia was one of the songs that was suggested.
No, but Joel, you have to understand that I am a completely unmusical person.
I know.
I have never bought a record in my life. I do not listen to music as such, ever. People take me out to the opera or something, or I take Jackie, well, that's because I'm taking somebody. But music is not part of my life. What is part of my life is stories. And therefore, if I'm asked about music, it has to be about the words, not the music. Now, you may or may not know that there are two things. One, that I am, in as much as I'm anything, I did natural sciences at Cambridge and I'm a chemist. And the second thing is that we are about to start Bereshit, which is about the beginning of the world and the formation of the earth and all of the elements. And therefore, I found a story that related to me and Bereshit in a song where the words are far more important than the music.
And here it is. Tom Lehrer, The Elements.
There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, and iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium, lutetium, vanadium, and lanthanum, and osmium, and astatine, and radium, and gold, protactinium, and indium, and gallium, and iodine, and thorium, and thulium, and thallium. There's yttrium, ytterbium, actinium, rubidium, and boron, gadolinium, niobium, iridium, and strontium, and silicon, and silver, and samarium, and bismuth, bromine, lithium, beryllium, and barium. There's holmium and helium and hafnium and erbium and phosphorus and francium and fluorine and terbium and manganese and mercurium, molybdenum, magnesium, dysprosium and scandium and cerium and cesium and lead, praseodymium and platinum, plutonium, palladium, promethium, potassium, polonium and tantalum, technetium, titanium, tellurium and cadmium and calcium and chromium and curium. There's sulfur, californium, and fermium, berkelium, and also mendelevium, einsteinium, nobelium, and argon, krypton, neon, radon, xenon, zinc, and rhodium, and chlorine, carbon, cobalt, copper, tungsten, tin, and sodium. These are the only ones of which the news has come to Harvard. And there may be many others, but they haven't been discovered.
And there it is, The Elements. One day, Peter, will ask you to sing along to that. So we've come to the end of the evening, but before we finish, as in previous evenings, it's time for the castaway section. And obviously there had to be a Simchat Torah theme to it. So we came up with a slight alteration of the usual format, which is that you're going to be cast away to your Sukkot desert island. And we will be sending with you the Torah with a translation and a complete set of sukkah building materials. But I'd like you to choose a drink as a Simchat Torah, alcoholic or otherwise, a luxury item and a book. So Peter, let's start with you.
The drink would have to be Coca-Cola, with which I toasted my bride at our wedding because I don't drink very much. The book would be actually, or my luxury item in the book contained would be the Kindle with my science fiction collection on. Because as I said, I'm not about music, I'm all about words. And so somewhere in there is everything that I could possibly want.
So that's your luxury as well, is it?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you, Peter. And Robert.
Okay. My drink would be whiskey.
Good choice.
The book, I think, would be The Clifton Chronicles by Jeffrey Archer, because it's a selection of 5 books in the trilogy. They called it a trilogy, and then it went longer and longer. But the luxury item would be a watch. Then at least I would know the time of day and when to drink everyone's health. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And finally, Lucy.
Well, the drink would definitely be a whiskey sour. The luxury item, that was tricky. I always envied Charles, because I knew that if he ever went to a desert island, he would take his Swiss Army knife with him. I didn't know what I could take as he was taking that. He has offered something to me. I think he's about to show it to you, but I don't think I'm going to take it, circular saw, because the first thing I'd be likely to do is chop my own leg off. So the luxury item is going to be an armchair that I can sit in my sukkah and read my book. And the book that I've chosen, that was a tricky one, because I spend most of my life reading novels, and picking one was almost impossible, but I'm going to go for Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I think is probably the most perfect novel ever written.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, and Mazal Tov again to Lucy, Peter, Robert, Aaron, and Edden. And thank you very much for sharing your recollections, your music, your stories. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And just finally, Lucy, you had
thank you for hosting it.
A pleasure, Mazal Tov. And Lucy, you had one final song choice, which we're going to close the show with. So please tell us what you chose.
Well, I think this is the ultimate song of optimism, and I have asked for it not because I'm a football fan, let alone a Liverpool fan, but because it is the song that just reminds everybody that however bad things are, you've just got to keep your head up because it's going to get better. And it also reminds me of a very beautiful, beautiful wedding that some of us were lucky enough to go to, and it is my favourite song. So, Joe, over to you.
You'll Never Walk Alone, Jerry and the Pacemakers.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver sound of love. Walk on